The lunch crowd had just begun to thin when the doorbell above the cafe's glass door jingled again. The smell of roasted coffee beans and baked bread filled the air. Behind the counter, a young waitress, her brown hair tied in a messy bun, uniform slightly wrinkled from the long morning rush, lifted her head. At the corner table sat a man in his early 40s, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit, with a smartwatch blinking quietly on his wrist. Across from him was a boy, maybe 10 or 11, dressed in a neatly ironed shirt, trying to hide his unease behind a polite smile. They looked out of place here, the kind of people used to being served, not waiting. But what caught her attention wasn't their clothes. It was the boy's face. He was pale, his lips a faint shade of blue, and his hand trembled as he lifted his glass of juice. She blinked. Maybe he was just nervous. Or tired, but something didn't feel right when she brought their order, a grilled sandwich and a bowl of soup. She noticed the boy's breathing, shallow, rapid. A small bead of sweat trickled down his forehead even though the cafe's air conditioner hummed softly. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly, crouching a little. The father, clearly in a hurry, barely looked up from his phone. "He's fine. He just skipped breakfast, thank you." But she hesitated. Years of dealing with people had given her an instinct she couldn't explain. And right now, that instinct screamed that something was wrong. A few minutes later, she saw the boy drop his spoon. His fingers stiffened, his eyes rolled slightly. Her heart leaped. Without thinking, she ran to him, calling out, "Sir, your son. He's not fine." The man turned, confused, as the boy collapsed forward onto the table. Everything after that moved in a blur. The waitress shouted for someone to call an ambulance, carefully laying the boy flat on the floor. She checked his pulse, tilting his head, checking his airway just like she'd learned years ago when she volunteered at a local first aid drive. "Stay with me, kiddo," she whispered, tapping his cheek gently. "You're gonna be okay." The man knelt beside her, panic flooding his face now. "Please do something. He has a heart condition. I know," she said firmly, pressing down in rhythm on the boy's chest, "but I need you to trust me." People gathered around, whispering, recording, frozen in shock, but she didn't notice any of it. All she could hear was the faint sound of sirens growing closer. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly took over. One of them looked up and nodded at her with quiet respect. "You saved his life. Another minute and..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. The billionaire. Because that's what everyone later learned he was. Stood there, speechless. His eyes, usually cold and calculated, softened with something he hadn't felt in years, gratitude. Hours later, when the cafe had emptied and the sun dipped low, he returned. No cameras, no assistants. Just him. He found her cleaning tables, humming quietly to herself. "I wanted to thank you," he said, voice low, "my son. The doctors said if you hadn't acted when you did." She looked up, a small, tired smile crossing her face. "I just did what anyone should do." He studied her, her simple uniform, her weary hands, her unassuming grace. Not everyone would have noticed or cared. She shrugged, maybe, but sometimes it's the people no one notices who notice everything. For the first time in a long while, he smiled. Not the kind that closes deals or hides emotion, but the kind that carries gratitude deeper than words. And though the world around them would never remember her name, he knew he'd never forget her face. The waitress who saw what everyone else ignored, and in doing so, saved his world. He stood there for a moment longer, unsure how to say what he truly felt. The woman who had saved his son's life wasn't a doctor or a specialist or anyone with status. She was just kind, present, brave enough to care when no one else did. A few weeks later, the same black car that had once looked out of place outside the cafe returned. This time, the boy was sitting inside, waving eagerly through the window. He looked healthier, a wide smile brightening his young face. The waitress stepped out from the cafe, surprised. The billionaire approached her, holding an envelope in his hand. "You didn't just save my son," he said. "You reminded me what really matters." He handed her the envelope, but she shook her head. "Please," she said gently, "I didn't do it for money." He smiled. "It's not money." Inside was a letter, an offer for a full scholarship to a nursing program. A path toward a dream she'd quietly buried years ago because of bills, work, and life's weight. "I found out you once wanted to be a nurse," he continued. "Let me help you finish that dream. The world needs more people who notice." Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to hide behind a trembling smile. For the first time in a long while, hope didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt real, alive, and within reach. Months passed. The cafe still smelled like coffee and bread, but one seat always stayed open, the one where kindness had rewritten fate. The billionaire and his son often stopped by, not as customers, but as friends. And every time someone new walked in tired, broken, unnoticed, the waitress, now studying to become a nurse, greeted them with the same warmth she had shown that little boy, because she knew one small act of kindness could change a day. Or a life. In a world obsessed with power and status, it wasn't money or fame that saved a life that day. It was compassion, the kind that costs nothing but changes everything.